Going to get started. Let me just make sure everything is recording. And fantastic, we are live. So well, I should say good, good night, my listeners. This is another episode of the Noel Greene Live podcast. Today here I have author and editor Peter Moon, and we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. So, Peter, would you like to tell the audience who you are and just give a little bit of a background of what you do and who you are as a person and your work?
Well, of course, my name is Peter Moon, and I am a author and a publisher. My company is Sky Books, and I came to notoriety in 1992 when I co-authored and published a book called The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time, which was about a series of avant-garde experiments with mind control and manipulation of consciousness that occurred with radio frequency at the eastern end of Long Island at a location known as Montauk Point, where there was a Air Force station known as Camp Hero, and it was operating outside the bounds of the congressional budget. And there was an investigation by Senator Barry Goldwater. And it was a bunch of weird stuff going on. And Preston Nichols, my co-author, was involved in the project and was recovering memories of what happened, because a lot of it was blanked out. That's, in essence, a brief introduction to my work. And then, of course, I began to investigate it, found out that it was real. There was even at least one court case that established that much of what we were talking about was true. And that's just in a nutshell of an introduction to who I am.
Okay, great, fantastic. So let's get right on into it. Now, you mentioned Montauk Project. For any one of my listeners who may not know what it is, you kind of alluded to it already, but can you go into a little bit in depth on what the Montauk Project is?
Certainly. Mm-hmm. Of course, Montauk is a little town at the eastern end of Long Island, about 7 miles from the tip of Long Island. At the extreme end is Montauk Point, and this is where the name comes from, Montauk. But the Montauk Project is a colloquial name for a series of experiments that actually culminated in about from 1972 to 1983. And that there's the prequel to those experiments starts with an experiment in 1943 aboard the USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort, the U.S. Navy, when the Navy was, this is in the early days of radar, and they were attempting to make this ship appear invisible to other ships. There was a lot of, the whole ship was housed in electromagnetic coils. There were generators and whatnot, generating rotating fields of electromagnetic energy. And basically, the ship disappeared in 1943, and it went out of space and time as we know it. Now, that's the subject of other books. We have a little bit of a description of it. But Preston Nichols, my co-author, knew more about it than anybody. And he had studied the file on it. He had even seen videos on it. There was a video on it. I say video, when the video was a film, a newsreel on it that was shown in early, around the time. It wasn't considered super secret till later. And the experiment definitely occurred, and the sailors who were aboard the ship suffered great trauma. Some of them, if it was physical trauma or spontaneous combustion into flames, some of them, when they re-entered this time and space, were amalgamated, joined to the structure of the ship itself, the bulkheads of the ship. There was mental derangement suffered by the crew, and they were taken. Many of them were taken to a location on Long Island known as Camp Upton, which was a World War I convalescent hospital in Yaphank. Um, Yaphank is now adjacent to where the premier nuclear facility in the world is, or was at that time, or later became Brookhaven National Laboratories, now controlled by the Department of Energy. It used to be controlled by the Associated Universities, a quasi academic government institution, but it was very vague as to its ownership. But now it's under the Department of Energy. And of course, Camp Upton was where they studied these sailors, and associated with Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was then in its onset with nuclear, the atomic bomb and nuclear energy being explored. They did an experiment. I mean, they did a research, was called the human factor study, to find out when human beings were subject to electromagnetic radiation that effectively gated them into other dimensions other than this regular third dimension, why they suffered such trauma. And this research carried forth throughout the early 50s. The book talks about it. They were trying to couple the mind of man with electromagnetic frequency, which means radio waves. So you could influence the mind of man with radio waves, and vice versa. The human being could influence radio waves and also affect the minds of other people. And of course, all of this culminated when they decided they would move these experiments out to Montauk, Camp Hero, where there was a huge, huge radar antenna, which still exists to this day. And it had a far reach, and they would experiment on the local population, even extending as far as Connecticut, across the Long Island Sound. And they could affect the behavior of animals. They could affect the behavior of humans. And of course, the more they experimented with the mind and radio frequency, they found that a very gifted psychic by the name of Duncan Cameron was able to actually manipulate matter and manipulate time by having matter appear at different times. So this was, and there was a whole study of what are known as time references. We all have time references. So it's just what you live by is your time reference. Is it 6 o'clock? Is it 7 o'clock? And of course, there's a consistency in your universe. When these things begin to change, then your whole psychology changes. It literally can gate in insanity, craziness. So that's in a nutshell what the Montauk Project is.
All right, so that was an extensive breakdown. I appreciate that. So I want to bring up something that you said in your book about Oh, that word gets me every time, Peter. Synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Yes, and it says here that synchronicity is called the fabric of time because it is the principle by which we recognize or know the phenomenon of time. If different actions are aligned and intercede within one frame of reference, they are said to synchronize. In a clock, all the gears mesh in a synchronized manner so as to measure the passage of time. So when you were discussing the Montauk project, you said something about dimensions in time, and I kind of want to go a little bit into depth about that. So when you wrote that piece, that quote in your book, and that word pops up all the time, especially in the Black Moon. You know, synchronicity is everything, and it's not by accident. So so would synchronicity to you is jumping through dimensions and jumping through time. Did you get that idea of that's what Project Montauk is? Because I'm trying to get into the mechanics of everything, because people will kind of listen to what you're saying, and they're going like dimensions and time, like what does that mean? So can you
Okay,
go into the
okay,
mechanics
okay,
of what that
okay.
means?
Your
Yeah.
question is kind of awkward and might be more confusing than my answer.
Okay, nah, go
But
ahead, go for it.
but to clarify, and first because you mentioned synchronicity,
Yes.
first I will explain that concept and explain how it relates to the Montauk Project and to time or potentially time travel. But
Mm-hmm.
synchronicity is a word which basically phonetically means syn, S-Y-N, means with or together,
Mm-hmm.
and chronicity, chronos is time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's time together. It's where time is associated. So, uh, it's the synchronicity is basically, you experience synchronicity with your family because you're with them all the time, and with other people. Uh, and then if you see somebody from your work or family outside by surprise in a store, it's like, wow, yeah, look at you. It's a synchronicity. It's a recognition. So, but the word itself was coined by a psychiatrist by the name of Carl Jung, Jung, Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist who was a uh,
Mm-hmm.
colleague and eventual rival of Sigmund Freud.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what he explained was he explained that what he called it was a precursor. Synchronicity is when, it's coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
So if you uh, have a boss named Sam Jones, and then you go out and uh, you have a meeting with somebody, a friend, and his boss is named Sam Jones, well, that's a synchronicity. But what Carl Jung said, it's he explained it. He called it it's obviously a coincidence. It's a precursor to the Tao. And when I say Tao, that's a Chinese word spelled Tao, sometimes spelled Dao, but it's pronounced Tao, just like the Dow Jones, but it's Tao
Mm-hmm.
and Tao. And the Tao is an ancient Chinese word that, in its most common sense, means way or the way. But when you get into the more esoteric meanings of it, it means uh, the way of nature. But the true Tao, the true way, cannot be described or explained. In the same way, if you read the Hebrew tradition, the holy books, the Bible, it will, or the Talmud, it will say that the true name of God cannot be named. You cannot name. And this is other traditions. You can't name God because when you name God, you take something that's infinite and you put it into the finite.
Mm-hmm.
So now, why synchronicity is important, at least in my work, is when I began to investigate the claims of Preston Nichols, some of which then were claims and anecdotal stories, investigate in the project itself, and try to corroborate what he said. I began to experience synchronicity on a rather unprecedented level. It was so much of it that I had to write a book about it following the Montauk project called Montauk Revisited: Adventures in Synchronicity. Now, one of, and of course, a lot of the synchronicity I had experienced was with very dark associations, one of them being 666,
Mm-hmm.
identified with the beast, the number of the beast in the Bible. Now, I do not come from a biblical background, so a lot of this stuff I had to experience and learn about.
Mm-hmm.
But what what the when we say that synchronicity is the precursor, as Carl Jung said, to the Tao, it means you're getting close to the Tao, or we can also describe that as the God mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get close to the God mind, as any uh, evangelist will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, is that you're going to encounter the adversary to God, which is the devil or Satan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, wow. So uh, and I did have many experiences with synchronicity. It sounds like you're trying to ask a question.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying. You actually answered what I was trying to ask there. So can you because you mentioned a little bit about you mentioned 666, and I can recall reading reading from the book. Um, about the concept of 666 and what Aleister Crowley meant by 666, and based of my understanding of what was said in the book and what Mr. Crowley was trying to convey, he was trying to convey the sense that 666 is the meaning of of the carbon based.
Well, let me clarify that.
Yes.
Let me clarify. That was not what he said. He never said that, which you're alluding to, which we haven't
Yes.
even explained that to the audience. But first, we better explain to the audience who or what Aleister Crowley is. So
Yes. Go. Yes. Go ahead, sir.
so
Yes.
so they're not confused. But Aleister Crowley, well, the only reason we're going to mention him in this
Mm-hmm.
context is because when I first met Preston Nichols,
Mm-hmm.
he had told me, uh, I had asked him in a question.
Yes.
Well, he had mentioned in a lecture
Mm-hmm.
that in an earlier life, himself and Duncan Cameron, the primary site, excuse me, uh, there was some audio blip there. Did you say something?
No. Go ahead.
All right. It might be a good idea if you mute while I'm talking because it might make it clearer, but that's at your discretion. So anyway, uh, Preston Nichols had said that himself and Duncan Cameron in an earlier life were known as the Wilson brothers. He was Preston Wilson and Duncan was Marcus Wilson. And they were the first manufacturers of scientific instruments in Great Britain. And they worked, they had a company. The company that manufactured these scientific instruments was, they were business partners with Aleister Crowley's father, who was a wealthy brewer and also an evangelist. And Aleister Crowley was his son, who was raised, force-fed the Bible. He knew the Bible backwards and forwards. But so Aleister Crowley becomes a person of interest in his own world, in the history of mankind, as an occultist and as a I guess what you'd say a villainous character, and known as the wickedest man in the world. Now, so anyway, when I when he told me that they were the Wilson brothers, I looked in Aleister Crowley's biography and all of his books to see if I could find any reference to the Wilson brothers. No, I could not. But what I did find was a lot of coincidences of name associations with the name Cameron. It was all about Cameron, and that Aleister Crowley's one of his best friends was named Duncan Cameron. And Duncan Cameron, of course, was the name of the psychic in the Montauk Project. So I had all of these coincidences beginning to surface. And although I could not find a verification, what I did find was synchronicity. So this is telling you that there's a meaningful coincidence. And although there was not a historical reference book I could find, I would later find other information to corroborate this. But to get back to your question of Aleister Crowley and 666, well, of course, he identified himself with the beast of Revelation when his mother caught him copulating with the maid, and she called him, "Oh, you're the beast, you're a beast." And he identified with it because he'd studied the beast. He says, "Oh, this is what I am." So he identified with the beast of Revelation. And if you are to indulge his most, I guess what you would say, exalted justifications for what he did, he would tell you that he was assuming the mantle of the Antichrist so as to gate in the Christ. Now, whether that's true or not is up for you to decide. I make no judgment on it, but this is what he said. Now, to get to your question of 666, he did not point this out. It was another friend of mine in the book who I refer to as Madam X. She pointed out to me that 666 is significant because we live in a carbon-based world. So there are 6 neutrons, 6 protons, and 6 electrons in the element of carbon. So 666 is indicative of the fact that this material universe we live in that is carbon-based were referenced to 666. Sort of like in the New Testament, Christ said this, this is the devil's world. The devil offers him the kingdom of the earth, but he refuses because it's the devil's world. It's not what he wants. He doesn't belong here. So I think that answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. For sure, for sure. Um, in the book there, since we're on the topic of Crowley, a lot of people associate, because as you said, Crowley identified himself with the beast, but also I noticed while talking to people who may know of Mister of Aleister Crowley, they usually associate him with with the Baphomet, which you did allude to in the book. If you have any knowledge on the Baphomet, can you expound on that with the audience, or if you've gained any sort of knowledge through your findings of what the Baphomet represents?
Well, of course, we know the image of Baphomet or Baphomet, as they would say in France. That's okay. Is a if you could mute because it's almost like I don't know what that is, but anyway, Baphomet is depicted. Most people recognize it as the depiction you will see in the tarot card known as the devil, and it's a goat-headed creature with the torso is human with female breasts, bottom half is goat legs with cloven hooves, and it's identified with an Egyptian goat of Mendes, but I guess what you'd say the graphic that is most identified with Baphomet is from a man named Eliphas Levi, who real name was Alphonse Constant. Alphonse Constant. Now, this character died right before Aleister Crowley in 1875, and Crowley believed that he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. And he chose the name Aleister Crowley. His real name was Edward Alexander Crowley. It was not Aleister Crowley. He took on the name Aleister, and because then it not only rhymed with Alphonse Constant, AC, it also had the initials of AC, Antichrist. So one of the coincidences I found out that Duncan Cameron, his real name, his full name, I should say, was Alexander Duncan Cameron. And his brother's name, according to his story involved with the Philadelphia experiment, was Edwards. So you had Edward Cameron, Alexander Cameron, and then I see that Crowley's real name is Edward Alexander Cameron. So that was the first of the coincidences I found. And there was a resonance between the Camerons and the Crowleys. But to get back to your question of Baphomet, there's this identification with the devil, but this gets a little nuanced, and it also gets very nuanced when you get deeper into the origins of Baphomet. But the first nuance I was going to refer to is that the tarot card, the devil, is identified astrologically with the sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn is the goat, but Capricorn is the highest achiever in the zodiac. He climbs a mountain, and he also has spiral horns. The goat has spiral horns, as does Baphomet in the tarot depiction. So this is spiraling up, and it's like the devil is the foundation of the tree of life, but you work up. It's just like a human being born on the earth wants to spiral up into the higher energies as depicted in the tree of life schematic. And so there is a redeemable feature, and it's also ruled astrologically by Saturn, which is very phonetically close to Satan, Saturn, Satan. But Saturn is the bottom line. Like if Saturn rules contracts, when you have contracts that say the devil is in the details, that's Saturn. You know, if you employ all of the careful cleverness of contract language, you won't be outsmarted. This applies to dealing with the devil, so to speak. This is the sort of the challenges we have in living in the material world. We should honor our contracts. We should make contracts that are not unfair, either to ourselves or others, because Saturn is also the Lord of Karma in astrology. So, having said that, there's a different interpretation of Baphomet that goes back earlier into the Germanic world. And I would even say that the Knights Templar, who were tortured in the Inquisition, would cough up that they worshiped this Baphomet, which was sometimes depicted as a strange head or the head of an ass. But there is an earlier tradition where Baphomet represented a two-headed man, like a half man, half woman, facing in opposite directions. And this was a sign of polarity, a balance of male and female, much like the symbolic of the the alchemical marriage in the Rosy Cross or Rosicrucian tradition. Now, that is also the sign of Capricorn, Capricorn occurs during January primarily, and January is named after Janus, Janus, the god of time, with two heads, one looking forwards, one looking backwards. That's the beginning of the year when we move into Capricorn on the 21st of December. The calendar we have, Gregorian calendar, changes it to January 1st. So you have this identity of two. Now, looking backwards, looking forwards, male, female, what Baphomet represented in the earlier form was a portal to another world, a portal to another world. I would also tell you, in the context of what we're discussing, it's important to recognize that in the early Christian era, they used what was called the Vesica Pisces. It's like it's the fish. It's the Christian Jesus fish, they call it sometimes. That symbol is the symbol for Pisces, the astrological sign. But what that represented, the Jesus fish or the Vesica Pisces, is portions of two spheres interlocking. That's two spheres representing different dimensions. So you have um, a early Christianity was talking about going to another world. This world is Satan's world, and it degenerated into the fact of, well, we're not going to bathe in this world. We don't need to be clean in this world because Romans are clean and Romans are diabolic. So, we're going to be dirty, but we'll be clean in the other world. So they didn't bathe in this sort of thing, and uh, denied the common pleasures of the earth to the point where it was too extreme. Therefore, violating the Buddhist doctrine of the middle way, and it got extreme in the early not the early days of Christianity, but the subsequent dark ages and all that. But the early that early symbol of the Vesica Pisces, the Christians would write for meeting places and stuff like that, was symbolic of, we're talking about a dimension to another world. That's what I have to say about your question.
All right. Speaking of a dimension to another world, I can recall a conversation that you had with I can't remember her name, but it was you were looking for pieces in Montauk, and she said you were missing the last piece, and she was talking about how people get multi personal personality disorder.
Multiple personality disorder, yes.
Yes. And from there, I found this interesting, and I would like you to expound on this. So she was saying people get multi personality disorder, and she said something along the lines of this activates the pineal gland, and then from there, people become psychic. Can you expound a little bit more on that?
Well, first I will clarify who she is.
Yes.
She is a woman who contacted me after reading the Montauk Project, and she was a woman who had had a very unusual and strange life. Her name was Anna, was her real name, Anna. Anna was the uh, protege concubine of a man named Dr. Ewan Cameron. Now, of course, the name Cameron was very significant because uh, she said he was the cousin of Duncan Cameron's father, Duncan Cameron Sr. And she was aboard a yacht with him frequently, I think off Cape Cod, where they hung out with Joseph Kennedy, the father of John F. Kennedy, and there was a lot of abusive behavior, sexual behavior that took place there. But Ewan Cameron was the head of the American Psychiatric Association, the World Psychiatric Association, and the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and he is infamous for his experiments with MK Ultra and experimenting on people in Montreal. And this was acknowledged and admitted in a court case where he was he was dead by this time, whereas the victims won a court case. They weren't compensated anywhere near, but he used to uh, make people crazy uh, in a process called psychic driving, where he would repeat commands, have them listen to commands on a repetitive tape loop, and basically break their minds open. And of course, what she told, now I met with this woman. She had 5 daughters with 5 different husbands that were all set up for her. I met, I believe, all the daughters. Uh, One even came to visit me later. Her father was Egyptian. Uh, and the, but see, basically, what would take place is if you torture a person, suppress them enough, uh, a different and this occurs in ordinary insanity, where the mind will break and a new personality will appear, and you program that personality. It could be like an assassin personality. It could be like a woman who has a sex personality, whereas the sexy woman will appear to, seduce and be a sex spy, seduce a world leader or somebody of importance. And they're controllable by a programmer. And this is what she was alluding to. Um, and what I was also going to say is there becomes a very nuanced line. Where do you draw the line between this personality that appears and a separate identity, which is, identity, which is essentially an entity slash demon. So that's a little bit of what she wanted to share with me and bring out.
Okay, I wanted to, I wanted to ask you, in that context. So I remember, I think it was last week. No, it was 2 weeks ago, in my communication theory class, and we talked about cognitive dissonance, and this is when someone goes against uh, what their beliefs are, or their opinions are, even though they 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 know consciously that this is not good, this is not good for me. With that, so what would that, in that context, would cognitive dissonance be sort of similar to that in that context, or would it be just a tad bit different? I was just
Well,
curious.
I want to address that, and you've brought up a very important point with regards to cognitive dissonance, um, and just to more or less restate what you just said to make it very clear, cognitive dissonance is when you're in a situation. It's very similar to the term we know as gaslighting. Gaslighting is a term which comes from a movie where, this husband was, you know, keeping the gas lights that lit up the room low, and she said, "Oh, it's low." Her wife sees it's low, and he keeps telling her it's high, and he convinces her she's nuts because she's not seeing correctly when he's deliberately manipulating the lighting, and he's making her think she's crazy by telling her false information and criticizing her for it. So she becomes uncertain of her own perceptions. Now, in common experience, gaslighting is when somebody says something, or say, particularly in a group, uh, and they do this in the military, where they will humiliate or say something that's just stupid to the or not true to the recruits in boot camp or whatnot, but they have to obey. You know, like they might tell everybody, "Okay, repeat. I'm a happy shithead. I'm a happy shithead," and they're doing it in cadence. And of course, they're not, but that's what they're going to be treated like. They're going to obey. Now that's a more obvious form of it, but where you have, like, we experience this in the news on a daily basis, where they will expose the crime of a political figure, and then they don't, like the Jeffrey Epstein case and the whole circumstances of that. And then instead of investigating the Jeffrey Epstein case, they raise the whole complex that he lived in or that he had in the Virgin Islands. They destroy any possibility of evidence. So, in other words, the authorities are inculcating the population to be cognitively dissonant by just saying, okay, that's the way it is. And we all, or like, say, with the inflation, uh, the the wall in Mexico, everybody wants the wall in Mexico until Trump gets elected and wants to do it. And then they don't want the wall because Trump will get credit. So it's like, and you're all supposed to think whatever. And it's just, people just suck it up. And politicians lie, the media lies. That's uh, and the whole, I guess, stream of information that people are fed is a bigger issue of cognitive dissonance. Now, you're talking about on the more individual programmed level. where the person is like a Stepford wife who's just, yeah, he's that's, I was talking about common cognitive dissonance. This is a very specialized form of cognitive dissonance where the person is like going along, his whole real personality is submerged and is not surfacing because these other entities uh, take it over. So he's not just cognitively dissonant; he's cognitively dissonant on steroids. But go ahead.
Okay,
So
yeah.
that's a metaphor. Steroids, not actual steroids.
No, no, yeah, we get it, we get it. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to bring in regards to the conversation in this context um, about the whole split personality thing and cognitive dissonance. I was reading a paper by Wilhelm Reich, and he does work. He does psychotherapy work, and he's worked with the concepts of orgone. We'll get to that later on, but he's worked with that stuff. But he did a paper, and there was a quote from there was something he said in this paper, and I'm reading it now. It says, "Psychic health depends upon orgastic potency, i.e., upon the degree to which one can surrender to and experience the climax of excitation in the natural sexual act. It is founded upon the healthy character attitude of the individual's capacity for love. Psychic illnesses are the result of a disturbance of the natural ability of love." And then he goes on to say, "People who are brought up with a negative attitude toward life and sex uh, acquire a pleasure and anxiety, which is psychologically anchored in chronic muscular spasms. The neurotic pleasure and anxiety is the basis on which life negating di- dictator producing views of life are reproduced by people themselves. It is the core of the fear of an independent, freedom oriented way of life. And this fear becomes the most significant source of strength for every form of political reaction, for domination of the majority of working men and women by individual persons or groups." So like
I
what?
can, I can address that.
Yes,
Uh, it's very long-winded, uh,
yes.
but
I just wanted to make sure
if
I
you
get
could,
it.
no, it's fine. It's very. I'm just saying it's very long-winded. If you could cut and paste that and send it to me, I would appreciate it because I would like to take that and break it down in language that's much clearer for people. If you can cut and paste it, I would appreciate it. If it's cut and pastable for you.
Yes, hold on. Let me
Yeah, but I mean, do that. You don't have to do it now. But I'm saying is
yes.
this is I'm going to address this. Of course, I'm going to say Wilhelm Reich uh, is sort of the overlooked psychiatrist. He was the two famous psychiatrists were Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud,
Mm-hmm.
and they eventually rivaled each other. And some psychiatrists are in the Freud camp, some are in the Jung camp. And Jung was more into the occult and the deeper aspects, whereas Freud, who was a very active cocaine user, was sort of fixated on sex. Like everything was neurotically sexual. Wilhelm Reich was the one who was also a part of that scene, but he's the one who's ignored. I mean, not totally ignored, because of course he's written books and people know of him. He was basically imprisoned by the government and died murdered in prison, murdered from abuse. But he was had a lot of insights into uh, sexuality, repression of sexuality, and how it affects the not just the society but the socioeconomics and the whole environment of society. Now, it's very important, and Preston Nichols, my co-author, was very involved in the more avant-garde extrapolations of Reich's work. The government took these things. They took his work and used it and misused it. But it's important to understand contextually Wilhelm Reich. He was raised on a farm where he saw the sexual behavior of animals. He was also involved in I guess what you'd say, a victim of pedophilia by an older woman. So at a very young age, he was sexualized by an older woman. And this, in the one sense, it, sort of created a big impression on him. You might say that it opened him up so that he had views on sexuality that were certainly open. It's sort of the opposite of repression. How that impacted him and his views just should be noted. However, what he's sort of a Western viewpoint with a scientific orientation of what we know in Asia as Tantra. Tantra is, of course, known as the yoga of sex. And one of the things that Reich, in his more, I don't know if this is in his published works, or his commonly published works, but was the study of the meridian system, or the flows of energy, the natural flows of what they call in Asia qi, life energy, spirit, breath. He would refer to it by his own term, orgone. Orgone is life energy. There was also something he called dor, D-O-R, which meant dead orgone, which is basically non-life energy. Now, in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, the energy flows through channels, regulatory channels. It flows through meridians. There's also submeridians, like there's all these little energy channels in the body. And of course, when that energy is flowing, it complements the other energy flows. So if you get all of your energy flowing, man, you're humming, and it's a real pleasant, active situation. And by the way, when you're in the zone like that, you're going to experience synchronicity. It's sort of like heaven on earth. That's what he's alluding to. Now, when he's talking about the pleasure and the repression of pleasure, and of course, the ultimate pleasure in the physiologically is the orgasm, is what he's referring to. And that's the culmination of a series of pleasurable experiences. Now, in Tantra, Eastern Tantra, these energies are cultivated and specialized, and so that it's like, instead of like a quick rock song that's over in 3 minutes, it's very exciting, pop, 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 pop. It's like a long, slow buildup of an orchestra. That's what Tantra would be. It's like, so instead of just like wham, bam, 3 minutes and it's over, or 15 minutes and it's over, you have a long buildup of an orchestra, a cultivation of energy. And I'm talking about this in the sense of, tantric yoga, or how you would parlay that into an experience with a member of the opposite sex. So anyway, when these channels get repressed, and much of Western society for many years, and even the early Christian world, was dedicated to repressing and controlling this energy. It jams the frequency of the natural energy of the body. Just for example, the repression on nudity. In indigenous cultures, nudity is not a big thing. It's it's just not an issue. But in the Western cultures, it's becomes a commodity to where you can only show nudity, so pornography, so people can profit from it and that sort of thing. Now, this impacts the individual growing up where he is frustrated. It also moves into the area where people become uh, dysfunctional in terms of what would be called a traditional tantric yoga relationship, and their frequencies get jammed, and it just to the point where if you don't have childbirth anymore. So it's like, because people are same sex, and so now they're even inventing ways to have children with test tubes without the normal channels. So this is what Wilhelm Reich is talking about, and I think I've answered your question.
Absolutely. All right. And speaking um, about sexual energies, it was mentioned also in the book, and it was saying, and it said that Aleister Crowley, often described as the wickedest man in the world, according to reports, Crowley himself had used the practice of sexual magic in order to manipulate time itself, communicate with disembodied entities, and to travel interdimensionally. Uh, can you expound on that? And does that correlate with what what you just said in correlation with Mr. Reich's or Dr. Reich's work?
Well, of course, they lived during the same time period. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know that they ever met
Mm-hmm.
or interacted in any way, but Aleister Crowley, this statement that you read or paraphrased was given to me by George Dixon, who I referred to as Mr. X in the book. He's passed away. He was involved with the Montauk Project, and this was his statements about Crowley manipulating time. They were not mine. They didn't read them from Crowley, but he thought that Crowley did practice sexual magic, uh, which was basically defined by him as utilizing the sexual process to uh, execute an intention. Now, you've all heard of positive thinking. You know, just think of something and project it, and it'll happen. Uh, this this concept of sexual magic is not just to think it, but it's to put energy behind it. So it's kind of like burning a candle, uh, and to execute an intention, or to call in uh, spiritual forces to execute your intention. And that's what he's alluding to. So what Crowley, and of course I've relayed other stories in my books about what Crowley may or may not have been doing, but all we know is that his name appeared and that he became a real source of interest and phenomena with regards to my investigation of the Montauk Project. We cannot separate it from his uh, identification with the Antichrist. It's like it's like when I investigated this, I got to visit the Antichrist living room, so to speak. Um, and Montauk would serve as the Antichrist living room. Now, the to take this a step further with Wilhelm Reich, because what they were doing at Montauk was they were taking the work of Joseph Mengele, and who had experimented extensively with twins, and they were coupling it with the work of Wilhelm Reich, which was exploring the sexual energy of twins and inducing trances with manipulating their sexuality so that they could see psychically and whatnot. And they would induce a trance so that the person would sort of go into a hypnagogic state and could see. All of this would be coupled and amplified with radio frequency technology. It was kind of a jolly good mess, but it was opening people up. Also, torture would be used to open people up. So it's like you're getting hold of a psychic reference frame in an individual and then uh, amping it up and using it for sort of like a making psychic spies, but it's all done in the reference frame of abuse. Question answered.
Great. So now I want to talk a little bit about the bloodlines of the Cameroons and the Kennedys, especially the Kennedys. Um, Mainly the Kennedys, because most people are familiar with that family. Of course, you have the John F. Kennedy, the guy that got assassinated. Everyone pretty much is familiar with him. Um, you wrote extensively about it in your book. Can you tell the audience a little bit about the Kennedy family and the Cameroon family, and yeah, just do that because I'm gonna segue into the so it's like a two-part question.
Well, the Kennedy, the name, uh, well, for of course, Anna had told me about the liaison between the Kennedys and the Camerons, and of course, they're both Gaelic people. The Camerons are, Scottish. The Kennedys are Irish, but they're both Gaelic. And um, the Kennedy, uh, I had read in a book. People will dispute this because there's different sources, but it said that a man named Kennedy was one of the people who founded the KKK. Now, certainly, and this is like I think it mentioned three men, and of course, the name Kennedy means, if you go back and look at the etymology, what it says, it means ugly head. Now, ugly head, Kennedys by and large are not ugly people, but the ugly head refers to Baphomet because this is what the Knights Templars coughed up under torture. This head, this ugly head. So there is a definite relation to that. They're a family that's steeped in curses. We've all seen that. Um, and of course, John F. Kennedy and his father identified very strongly with Germany. The father was very pro Hitler, and that eventually cost him his job as the ambassador of to the court of St. James in England. But and of course, their liaison with the Camerons was what I learned about with from Anna. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that. If there's anything that I missed, uh, I don't remember. That book was written over 20 years ago. I don't remember if I said anything more, if I missed anything on it.
No, no, that's fine. That's understandable. Yeah, I just um, wanted to ask you a little bit about it because I'm pretty sure the audience wants to kind of know a little bit about it. So I'm gonna go into the part two of my question with that, and it's about the um, the bloodline of Jesus Christ. So in your book, and it's my fault. I should have wrote these names down, but I do remember the context in the conversation. In the book,
We're
you
talking about the Black Sun, the book called The Black Sun, correct?
the book The Black Sun, and 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 you said something to him about the Isles of Sky, and the guy was like, "You just unlocked the secret of the Isles of Sky," and I'm no theologian, and and to be fair, you wrote it in the context of, like, this is, what you think, or because there are many theories about the bloodlines of Christ. But correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a conclusion that you came up with that it was the bloodline of the Cameroons and the Kennedys that is the bloodline of Christ. Is that correct?
Well, I will, perhaps restate your your question or whatever,
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
and then address it. Basically, what you're asking me about is a uh, hypothesis put forward that the Cameron name or clan, uh, and I don't remember if this even relates to the Kennedys at all, but the Cameron clan was related to the bloodline of Christ.
Yes.
Okay, that's basically what you're asking me, and to comment on that, and I will. That's a very deep subject, and I do address it in The Black Sun. It can be extrapolated on further based upon what I've found since then. Because I say that book was published, I think, in 1997, and it's boy, that's
Yeah,
20,
yeah.
26 years ago. Now,
It's a hypothesis. It
well, no,
changes.
that's fine. I'm just saying it was
Yeah,
published 26 years ago.
yeah.
Now, what I'm going to say is, um, the name, if you look up in the same book where it told me Kennedy means crooked head, or not crooked head, ugly head, it told me that the name for Cameron means crooked nose. Now, this is not accurate at all. And I learned this from a Celtic shaman whose name was Cameron. Her last name was Cameron. And she told me that the name Cameron came from the name Amran. Now, in Hebrew, you don't, when you see the letter C, or as we would put it in English, like Hanukkah, it's spelled like Chanukah. Some people will mispronounce Hanukkah as Chanukah because there's a CH, and the C is silent. So it's Hanukkah. So if the C is silent with Cameron, it's not Cameron, it's Amron, which is a phonetic, phoneticization. That's the right word. Phoneticized rendition of Amran. Amran. Now, Amran is the name, so it would be Qamran. Uh, it's very similar to the word Qumran, which you see the scrolls of Qumran, or the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Qumran, Qamran. But you take off that hard C and it's Amran. Now, Amran is a name that appears in the Quran. Mary, the Christians know her as Virgin Mary. The Muslims, I think, refer to her just as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her name is Amran. She's from the family of Amran. But if you go into the tradition of Egypt and Hebrew, you'll see that she comes from the family of Ammon, Amon, like the god of Amun Ra, the god Amun Ra. Now, Ammon shows up in Mary in the Bible is from the tribe of Benjamin. but Benjamin means son of or derived from, so it's Ben Ammon. Now, Benjamin, we put the J in it. They don't pronounce the J. Like, they don't say Jehovah or Jesus. They say Yahweh or Yeshua. And so Benjamin is Ben Ammon, Ben Ammon, Ben Ammon, Ben Ammon, the tribe of Benjamin. And Joseph, the uh, stepfather of Jesus in the Bible, is from the tribe of Judea. Those were the two tribes that were left after the diaspora. So Jesus represents the unification of Jesus, of the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah, or Judea and Judah. And they have, I learned this from a man named Doug Benjamin, who's done a lot of work with the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Because he's from the Benjamin family and he understands stuff about his history, his familial history. So that is so this Celtic shaman is teaching me that this is where their name comes from. And her lineage was from Scotland. And of course, Anna told me of the Isle of Mull. She told me of the Cameron clan up there as well. And the Cameron clan, the Celtic shaman told me, is they had a very magical streak in them. And they had where they would, I guess, run afoul is from their own sexuality. They would misuse their sexuality, which obviously means magic. And this, of course, ties them to Aleister Crowley. She said that was one of the problems of the family. She wasn't putting down sexuality. She wasn't trying to incriminate her genetic line. But she said, they all had problems. So in any case, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, now I do remember this from the book, that that you mentioned Ron L. Hubbard and
L. Ron Hubbard is how
yeah,
you would say it. L.
yeah,
Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard, yes, and then you spoke to two. You didn't mention their names. You referred to them as Lord Cameron, Mr.
But
Lord.
yeah, these are two different individuals.
Yeah, yeah,
Both were Camerons.
yes,
Both were Camerons.
yes, and you notice the uh, the the features of the bloodlines and stuff. But yeah, but
Well, I will clarify that. And
yeah.
basically, what I said, I wasn't
Yes.
going to go down that track, but this Celtic shaman reminded me. I mean, you could see
Hmm.
the similarity in genetics between her and L. Ron Hubbard's daughter, Diana Hubbard, who I knew. Striking resemblance of genetics, like they came from the same gene pool, strikingly so. Also of Marjorie Cameron. Marjorie Cameron, who was the wife of Jack Parsons, a major disciple of Aleister Crowley. So, and a magical partner of L. Ron Hubbard. She looks like L. Ron Hubbard. She was a Cameron. Hubbard was from the Wilson family, and so was she. Her original name was Wilson. So here's the Wilson synchronicities came back, which is sort of the climax of the book Montauk Revisited, where I put it all together. So yes, now people might have a big issue with somebody like L. Ron Hubbard being associated with a messianic bloodline. But what I would tell people is you have, an angel and a demon are one side of each is one side of a coin. It's like the word demon, daemon, means of God. So a coin, you know, when you're dealing with an angel, there's a demon on the other side. It's like a black and white cookie. You know, it's like boom, boom. One side is dark, one side is light. So my take on L. Ron Hubbard is that he had, and I've written a book called L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity, because I had a close association with him back in the day. I'm not a Scientologist anymore, but I was way back in the day. That all ended in 1982, long before I ever got involved in writing. But he uh, had, and I said in the book, L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity, which I encourage people to read if they're interested in that, is that he had a messianic complex. And I say messianic, I don't mean that in a pejorative or negative sense. He looked at himself as a Messiah, and by Messiah, I don't mean a holy person, as he looked at himself as a deliverer of truth. Now, some people will tell you that he was a deliverer of lies. And if that's not true, it's certainly true for their experience and perception. There were also certain things he delivered that were based upon what I call abreaction techniques that would relieve people from PTSD, and many instances of people relieving themselves from post-traumatic stress disorder or from psychosomatic ills. That was the whole basis of his work. So he and his advocates definitely viewed him as a messianic figure. And, you know, to each his own as far as their perception. But the bloodline, that bloodline can go either way, in my opinion. It can go towards the light or towards the dark, because this is how life is. If you know, you've seen a politician can turn on a dime. He can become good. He can become bad. Sometimes a bad politician will make good laws because he's forced to by the circumstances. It's like our great men are made by the circumstances of their time, as some said, you know, and so that they do good because it'll win them votes, or the circumstances say, well, this is the only thing to do. And by the same token, a good person can go into politics and, you know, be handcuffed into doing the wrong thing. So anyway, that answers your question.
Absolutely. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about the Aryans and the Nazi topic, and to get into it. In the book, to give the context. So in the book, you were talking about the rocks of Exeter of oh boy of Exeter, and the book was saying how it was a window of these stars, and it was basically like one of those structures, like one of those pyramid structures where you can see the astronomical, oh boy, the astronomy portion of the building. So there's this scholar, this German scholar by the name of Wilhelm Toot. I hope I pronounced that
I
right.
thought it was Carl Williget, but
Huh?
I thought it was Carl Williget.
No, it said in 1920, a German scholar by the name of Wilhelm Todt. I hope I said that right.
You might have. Okay, here
Yeah,
it is. I have it.
turn to
I see where you are.
yeah, Wilhelm Todt turned into this information and recognized these rocks as an ancient astronomical observatory. If you go to page 913, I'm looking at it on Kindle. I'm not sure if that's the same page, but it says here that some scholars have discredited Todt because his language was bombastic, and he sought to show that Germans were racially superior in every aspect due to their ancient heritage. He goes by saying this included the claim that the ancient Germanic culture built the pyramids of Egypt. Toad's association with the Nazis had made it difficult for modern establishment scholars to digest the actual scholarship of his work. Ironically, his views were corroborated by an English scholar, Albert Watkins, who independently reached the same conclusions in his own research, minus the bombastic racial superiority. Watkins has no pro Aryan axe to grind, but his discoveries concerning the ancient Teutonic peoples would also remain buried. Um, Now, can you go into a little bit of detail about that, because when people associate just with Africa in general, they immediately go to dark skinned people, and then with Germanic cultures, people associate Germanic cultures with pale white skin, probably blonde hair, red hair, or anything like that. Can you go into details a little bit about that theory right there?
Well, this is a very complicated and convoluted subject. First of all, I want to clarify for the listening audience is you're referring to uh, the most, I guess what you'd say, sacred shrine to the SS, the German SS. And this was a castle at Wewelsburg uh, near Paderborn in Westphalia, Germany. Uh, it was a defunct castle that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, restored and resurrected, and he created a whole sacred shrine at that uh, at this. He had his own holy of holies in there for the Knights of the Round Table. Um, Even further, what I learned, it's not in the book, but when I went to Germany, I was told that what that room was to gather 12 crystal skulls in the year 2012. I've not found if they actually did that, but the skull on the cap of the SS was to represent the crystal skull of Atlantis. They were going to bring these crystal skulls back to this place in Wewelsburg, this castle. Now, it's interesting to note that although the Allies have destroyed uh, Hitler's bunker, they've destroyed Spandau prison, they've destroyed Hitler's uh, home, because they don't want these things to be shrines. Yet the Allies have left Wewelsburg intact, which is astounding to me. You know, why did they leave that intact? Anyway, uh, Himmler, Heinrich Himmler chose this area because he very much believed in the idea of the Aryan race and the Teutonic culture. And this was a pilgrimage that included, the people of Teutonic heritage, which includes the Celtic peoples. That's where your Camerons and your uh, uh, Kennedys come. Uh, Now, the ancient German myths or the German tradition has this Baphomet idea of going to another dimension. So this center of ritual, which was Externstein, uh, was the bigger area where there were these rock formations. And there was a great tree called the Tree of Life, called Irminsul. It was an actual tree at one time, but was cut down by the Christians. And the Christians desecrated the tree, minimized. But the rocks are so huge that there's even a house on top of one of them. And so then this scholar you're talking about, Wilhelm Toot, recognized these rocks as an observatory for the stars, whereas previous to that, it was thought to be a Christian structure. Um, So because of all of the stigma of the Third Reich, this really created a huge uh, violent reaction with the Allied culture. Now, the Allies are very dedicated to mistelling World War II, the antecedents of World War II. There's an information stream that's meant to just twist everything about the Third Reich and the Empire of Japan. I'm not telling you that what the Third Reich and the and the Empire of Japan did were, you know, right. I'm just saying is the Allies were as or even more twisted than these enemies. It's not that all these people involved in war were involved in war crimes and crimes against humanity, but there's just an obsession now. So they changed because the the original root language, which we now know as Indo-European, was called Indo-Aryan. That was the correct term for it. But they changed the word to Indo-European because they wanted to disassociate the stigma of the word Aryan as it was associated with the Third Reich, or as the Third Reich used it. I've even been told that original Aryans were black people. Now, I'm not, I can't back that up, but I can't refute it either. But anyway, uh, these rocks at Exerstein were a tremendous problem for the authorities because they're a great attraction because of their natural wonder. So they had to be denazified. Um, and um, and they took out a lot of the mythical attributes so that the population wouldn't understand them. But the what I point out in this chapter is that the word Teuton comes from a base word called teute, teuta, teututa, teuta. Now that's very ironic because this was the Egyptian name for the Egyptian scribe of the gods, Tehute, Tehute, who the Greeks called Thoth. And the reason the Greeks called him Thoth is because if you take those 5 letters, Thoth, and you pronounce them, it's Tehe-o-Tehe, Tehe-o-Te, Tehute, Tehe-o-Tehe. Tahuti is the builder of the Great Pyramid, and he's also the god of sexual magic, and he's the scribe of the gods. And the name, this is like the root of Teuton, 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 the Teutons. So you could make a extrapolation on this and say that this is where the Teutons come from. And then you have this German scholar named Teute, which is also like that. He's kind of inspired all this by his bombastic writing. But I don't know if I think I covered everything, maybe.
Yeah. No, for sure. I just wanted because I'm gonna kind of bring this home with the Vril with the Vril society in Thule, and really bring it all home with the Hebrew alphabet and the key, because there's a key element to that. But the Vril society has something to do with that. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about briefly about the Vril and what the Vril is, and yeah. So can you tell us briefly about what the Vril society is? Because when people step into getting into the occult, they'll come across Vril, and and Maria Orsic and all that stuff, but they don't know what that is. So can
All
you?
right.
Yes.
Let me address this. But before I address the Vril, um, is that people listen to this for the first time. You know, I've been writing and publishing for over 30 years. I've got over well over 20 books published or authored. And I realized about 10 years ago, even though I don't have a building and a, you know, academic or learning center in my name, I'm like an institution. I'm like an institution. I've written so many books that, and they're all very, you know, complementary of each other. And the story keeps growing and growing. So it's like I probably, if one wanted to study my work, it'd be more than, I mean, it would require a lot of studying, like a whole, that's a lot of books to read, and then a lot of information to put together. Um, the book we're talking about right now is The Black Sun, uh, Montauk's Nazi-Tibetan connection. But anyway, the power of the Vril. The Vril is, um, I learned, of course, I'd heard of the Vril Society. It's mentioned in books and whatnot. But I learned a lot about the Vril from a young man, he was young at the time, in Germany, who had read my book, The Montauk Project, and he published it in German. But I got to know him, and he had a very unusual experience. He was had some psychic capabilities, and I think he was in Sweden listening to a rock band. And I think one of the members of the rock band in Sweden, they were skinheads. They were skinheads, and they pointed out something about his crown chakra. He said, what are skinheads talking about crown chakras for? And it kind of like, you know, activated him. But somehow he got this, he was psychic. He had these connections when the Berlin Wall fell and East Germany became part of Germany. There were people who were part of the Knights Templar tradition in East Germany that came forward and released pictures to him of the flying craft, German flying saucers. And these were the province of what was known as the Vril Society. And they gave Jan pictures, and he gave me permission to show them in the Black Sun. The Black Sun was the first publication to publish these photographs. There was a video once that was produced by Adventures Unlimited, David Childress, that did show the German flying saucers in video. But this was the first book to feature them. There's now been other ones since then. It came out 10 years later, whatnot. But the Vril Society was sort of according to Jan, there was the Black Sun, which was the name of the secret society. SS, Schwarz Sun, SS, Black Sun. Underneath the Black Sun were two other secret societies, the Thule Society, Thule. Sometimes people mispronounce it Thule, but it's called Thule in German, and the Vril Society. Now, the Thule Society was tied to what was known as the Bavarian Illuminati, who funded the rise of Hitler. The Vril Society, well, both involved in both of these was a man named Karl Hausover. Karl Hausover was a sort of a psychic general in World War I and in the war against, and was involved with the Japanese. He spoke fluent Japanese. He was indoctrinated into, I think it was a Society of the Green Dragon. He had extensive connections in Japan, and he helped introduce the Axis, in the Axis, he introduced Japan to Germany and vice versa. Karl Hausover, he was an occultist, he was a general, and he was a professor of geopolitics. And he was a close friend of Rudolf Hess. Hess is, I believe, who introduced Hausover to Hitler. But Hausover was considered a major mentor of the occult aspects of the Third Reich. Now, he was involved with a group of women who were sort of the crux of the Vril Society. One of them you mentioned earlier was Maria Orsic. And what they did is they channeled energy, channeled entities, they said was from Aldebaran, and they gave general plans for spacecraft, flying saucers. Now, I'm going to digress back to the word Vril. The word Vril achieved a lot of popularity when there was a book called The Coming Race by Lord Bulwer Lytton. And he talked about a secret or a race within the inner earth that were called the Vrilia. That popularized it in European circles. But it is actually, Vril is a Tibetan word. And I want to see if I can get the exact.
Which word are you looking for?
Tibetan word for, here it is. Vril is defined here, is a primal energy. It's like orgone or chi, but it's Tibetan. And it's basically life force. Now, the whole idea of Vril in its ultimate form, or chi or orgone, is that you could actually power a flying craft with it, sort of like telekinesis. That's in its most exalted form. The German craft used, I guess what you'd say, physical means. But the Vril Society was formed on the body of these women that channeled information. And this became the templates for the flying craft, which the German engineers then put into practice. And this included the work of Dr. Victor Schauberger, who was very advanced. And they made different types of craft, the German craft. At the time of World War II, they were not efficient enough, and Hitler believed more in the conventional weapons. And the empire of the Third Reich on the European continent could not be defended. But they did take these craft to Antarctica and Unterland and basically formed a new armada. And these became the flying saucers of the 1940s and 1950s, which were inaccurately attributed to aliens, which created a whole, they don't, you'll never see the news talking about Nazi flying craft. They had flying craft down cold, very advanced. And they were known to have chased Admiral Byrd, or the mission Operation High Jump in 1946, where the U.S. went down to go to Antarctica, basically to take out the Nazi base. And it didn't work. He returned early. He was not the actual commander, but his team returned early and very defeated. They lost a lot of planes and craft. Of course, they didn't promote it as a war. They promoted it as an exploratory expedition. But the so the Vril Society was basically dedicated to technology. They believed it was the technology of Atlantis. It was very advanced technology. And Rudolf Hess was a very active member of the Vril Society. He had a very good grasp of the technology and he even lectured on it. But that's what I have to say about the Vril.
Yeah, man, awesome. And to tie that all back in with what you were saying, that when you can move, craft can move almost like telekinesis. That's real in its ultimate form. I wanted to bring this back to the key to the Hebrew alphabet and how it and how it kind of and how it kind of implodes like within itself. So it's almost like a like so for my audience listening. So it's like those that picture of a staircase and it's just spiraling down like that. The concept is like that, but it's like that. But Peter, would you mind telling the audience about the piece that you found in the Hebrew alphabet?
Yeah, I will explain that. And this is in the book Pyramids of Montauk.
Yes.
And by the way, those of you are interested in looking at my books, you can go to the Skybooks website, which is skybooks.usa.com, skybooks.usa.com, and you can see all the different books I've written. This is the third book that I put together called Pyramids of Montauk, Explorations in Consciousness. The books are also available on Kindle and on Amazon.com. But you can see in that book, The Pyramids of Montauk, all of my synchronicities led to the fact that I found out there were ancient pyramids at Montauk, put a picture of them, and the book is to explain what they were doing there. The family name were pharaohs. So they had pharaohs and pyramids at Montauk, and I was putting this together and tying it to Egypt, which some of the Montauk tribe had told me they came from Egypt. And anyway, in the course of all of this, I was introduced to the work of a very remarkable scholar, Hebrew scholar named Stan Tenen. And Stan Tenen, he's a rabbi. He had a very unique ability for pattern recognition. And when he read the first lines of Genesis in the Bible, he saw a repeating pattern. And he began to break down this pattern. Now, his website is the Meru Foundation, MERU Foundation, and you can see all sorts of wonderful magical information there. But what he discovered was that he figured out, now the shape of the universe is a toroid, torus, which is like a donut. And he figured out a shape that is within the context of the inner donut. It's like sort of a twisted, unique shape. It's hard to describe the shape. It's depicted in the book and depicted in his website. He might even have some videos on it now.
Kind of
But
similar
if
to.
you,
Oh,
what?
I'm sorry to interrupt. So kind of
Yeah,
similar to like so Victor Schauberger. So in one of his
wait, you're mixing. This has nothing to do with Victor Schauberger.
huh, no. I was saying to describe the shape. So he had
This has nothing to do with Victor Schauberger. Excuse me. Let me just continue.
okay.
It's a totally different subject. Um, Stan Tenen, okay, he figured out this shape. Now, if you were to shine a light on this object from 22 different positions, and you saw the shadow of the shape, you would have the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So all of the Hebrew letters were derived from this one shape, which is from the inner core of a toroid or donut, which is indicative of the shape of the universe. Therefore, he's explaining that Hebrew is a sacred language, sacred alphabet, rather. He said there are other alphabets that are like this, such as the Arabic alphabet and the Greek alphabet. But that is sort of the wonder of the Hebrew alphabet. So if you want to say something now about Victor Schellberger, go ahead, but I don't understand where you're coming from with him on this.
No, no, I was just saying to describe to describe the shape, like how you were saying it's a it's a donut. It's like it's going.
Well, it
It's
fits in part of
yeah,
a context and it's twisted. You
yeah.
can't describe the shape. You have to look at it either in the book Pyramids of Montauk or you got to go to Stan Tenon's website to really look at it. It cannot be described.
Okay, all right. Well, well, yeah. I just want to talk about that at the end because there was that was a little neat trick that I thought was what was really cool. So overall, you know, for my listeners, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. We did go into a bit of a bit of the occult principles, and I hope you know you guys you know take the knowledge that Mr. Moon has given and the sources he's also given. And if you guys resonate with this, or if you guys want to know more, like Mr. Moon said, you know, you can go to skybooks.com, and the books are
No,
also
no, no. Skybooks.usa.com.
skybooks.
Skybooks.usa.com.
Oh yeah. Can you send me the links to that so that way I can post?
I also have the Time Travel Education Center, which you can join and get 7 free videos, which explain that time travel is scientifically within the bounds of ordinary mathematics and physics. TimeTravelEducationCenter.com and SkyBooksUSA.com.
Great. Fantastic. It was really nice to have you on, and we really appreciate your knowledge and you giving your time up to talk to us about these concepts. And it was really nice having you. And for my audience, thank you guys for tuning in. And I will see you whenever I see you again. So,
Thank you very much.
so yeah, absolutely.